My name is Amy Tipton. I'm the Assistant Director of the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens, and we are very happy to have you with us today, and also to have Bob Sprague with us today. So Bob, welcome. Bob is going to be speaking about the native orchids of the Carolinas, which is a presentation we've not yet had with the Native Plant Society. The Native Plant Society, North Carolina Native Plant Society, is the host for this event. The UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens is the co-host. All right. I would be thanking myself if I read much about this slide. I'm representing the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens. I'm Amy Tipton, if I didn't mention already. And we have a wonderful outdoor gardens and also a wonderful greenhouse, which is being highlighted today with our Orchid Festival. The outdoor gardens is 10 acres of beautiful gardens in both a wild setting featuring our native plants and also in a garden that highlights plants that are native and also non-native, but tame. Yay. All right. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker. So Bob Sprague is with us from the Native Orchid Conference, and hopefully he will tell us a little bit about that organization. Bob has been working with orchids, photographing in the wild and researching orchids. And also he's involved in many orchid societies and orchid shows and events, and has been for years. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about himself, and then we will get started with the program. So Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Can you hear me?
We definitely can. Thank you.
Okay. So good afternoon, folks. Sorry for the delay. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to the Botanical Garden and the Native Plant Society for inviting me to meet with you today. We're going to talk about some of the native orchids you're most likely to encounter as you enjoy time outdoors in the Southeast, in particular the Carolinas. We'll also talk about some interesting conservation efforts currently underway and how you might participate. I'm not sure the makeup of this audience, but I was told the native plant folks are pretty sophisticated. Some of you may even suffer from OCOD, as I do. That's obsessive compulsive orchid disorder. But I suspect there are also some wildflower fanciers who are just beginning to appreciate orchids. So I'll try to strike a balance by offering some slightly technical information as well as some very general information. Every orchid talk that you ever will see starts with numbers, so we'll do the same thing. How many orchids are there? We know that orchids grow on 6 continents, everywhere except Antarctica. And estimates are there are a lot of them, and the number is changing. The bulk of them grow between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn in the tropical and subtropical areas of the world. We think there are between 25 and 35,000 orchid species in the world. Let's settle on a nice round number in between at 30,000. But how many of those are in North America? And when native orchid folks talk about orchids of North America, we exclude Mexico, unfortunately. There are a couple of logical reasons for doing so. One has to do with accessibility. Another, the fact that many of Mexico's orchids are epiphytes, and we're primarily concerned with terrestrial orchids. So if we eliminate Mexico, North America has somewhere around 250 species. Approximately 100 of those are confined to Florida, particularly southern Florida in the subtropics. That leaves 150 orchids in the rest of the continent. How many are in the Carolinas? Well, that's also a questionable number. We have estimates of 55 to 70. For today's purposes, I'm going to settle on 65 species, forms, varieties, and natural hybrids. So what are we talking about when we talk about those 65? Species, I think we know what we're talking about. On the left is probably the most common species of native orchid in our area here, the pink lady slipper or moccasin flower. Something you'll see in mixed deciduous woods, and you don't have to go too far to find that. if that's a pink lady slipper, the one on the right must be a white lady slipper. Well, that's not true. That is a white form of the pink lady slipper. As you know, you botanists and gardeners, many plants have white forms. There are other color forms as well. So here we have actually 2 of the 65 taxa that we're talking about. So here we have what, the yellow form of the pink lady slipper? No, we have a yellow lady slipper, separate species, different genetics. And the plant on the right is also fairly common in woodlands and sometimes along roadsides. The plant on the right, I can tell you the pouch is about half the size of the one on the left. It has a fragrance. That plant grows in much wetter conditions. And you can see the very rich mahogany petals and sepals, and the lateral petals are tightly coiled. So that is a variety of the yellow lady slipper. Whereas previously we had a form. A form is something that has a obvious anatomical or morphological difference, usually in color, sometimes foliage, but a variety has several distinct differences in appearance involving multiple characteristics, and often there's a separate geographic population involved. Next, we have 3 Bothanthera species on the bottom. Bothanthera is our largest genus. The so-called fringed orchids, there are about 40 species, but only about 10 or 12 of them are actually fringed. So we lump them all together. On the left, we have the yellow fringed orchid. I know it's orange. I didn't name it. Then the white fringed orchid and the gold crested orchid. And these are plants that often grow in close proximity to each other. And if the bloom time overlaps, and if there are pollinators in the area that can visit both plants or 2 of those plants, we get a hybrid. So on the left, in the larger photo, the white and the yellow fringed orchids combine to form a plant called Bothanthera times bicolor, or the bicolored orchid. The white fringed orchid and the gold crested orchid on the right combine to form something called Canby's orchid, another natural hybrid. So in case anybody's counting, I think before we're done, I want to show you, out of the 65 potential taxa in the Carolinas, 57 different plants. Guess what? We're already up to 9 in that couple of minutes. So where do we find our orchids? Lots of places. Orchids grow in deciduous forest in considerable numbers, mixed deciduous forest, also coniferous forest if there's an open understory and there's enough light. Many wet habitats, sphagnum bogs, pine savannas, precosins, wet meadows, stream corridors, woodland swamps, all host certain groups of native orchids. Interestingly enough, power line cuts are a real treasure trove of native orchids, believe it or not, as are roadside ditches. And the reason for that has to do with the fact that many orchids really thrive with some disturbance, particularly mowing if it's at an appropriate time. Power lines are maintained by the power companies so that the electrical transmission doesn't get interrupted with trees growing too high and so forth. So they will maintain those rights of way. And roadside ditches and rights of way along the roadsides are mowed on a regular basis. And you can find a number of orchids there, and we'll talk about those. A few things to keep in mind, however. Orchids don't recognize political boundaries, so they don't know if they're in North Carolina, Tennessee, or even Oklahoma. There are no orchids that are endemic to the Carolinas. And although we have a terrific orchid flora here, we have to share. We're not trying to outdo New England or the Pacific Northwest or wherever. Can be fickle. They can experience dormancy, sometimes for years. So we might think something's been extirpated when it's only resting. Pollinators can be fickle. A healthy pollinator population is critical to sustain a species in a particular locale. And unfortunately, taxonomists can be fickle. They constantly add, delete, merge, split, rename, and reclassify. And you thought Linnaeus had devised a good system. Well, he did. He would be appalled today. Government agencies can be, well, government agencies. Official flora are not updated regularly, and when they are, they're often by way of the dartboard method, and they aren't updated with changing taxonomy. The weather can be fickle. This is a biggie. Things are moving north. We may pick up a few species from Georgia and Florida while losing a few to cooler, more northerly climate. Habitat change, whether natural or man-made, can eliminate or in some cases add species in certain areas. Natural succession, forest fires, water table changes, either from human activities such as construction, logging, farming, or from natural causes, including precipitation patterns, and of all things, beavers. Okay, so we talked about some of the habitats that we might find orchids. We're not going to tell you specifically where to go, like, 3 miles down Possum Hollow Road behind the big oak tree. We avoid doing that to avoid the possibility of accidental damage by the uninformed or exploitation by the unscrupulous. And social media has added real concern in this regard. I think it's irresponsible to post GPS coordinates on Facebook. So let's take a quick look at a couple of habitat types, and these will be mentioned off and on as we proceed. A typical mixed is basically an oak forest with an open understory. There's lots of open space and sunlight. It's covered with bracken fern, but you could find the pink lady slippers and rattlesnake orchids and others in a habitat like that. An open meadow, particularly if it's wet, none of those flowers are orchids, but that fellow is photographing a little tiny green orchid that likes this sunny, wet meadow. Orchids in this picture, the lighter pink and the darker pink. We'll get to them in a minute. And in the background, we see the yellow is bog asphodel. In the foreground, threadleaf sundew. There are some pitcher plant leaves. A roadside ditch. Strangely enough, this is a spot where this picture could be taken without getting out of your car. Pull up along the shoulder, open the window, and shoot this stretch of orchids, white fringed orchids, that run about 100 yards from the shoulder of the road to the woods, which is only about 10 feet. In this place, we counted 600 blooming white fringed orchids. And there are lots of others that you can see along a roadside ditch or right of way. We mentioned power line cuts. This is one that's a little bit overgrown, but you can see in the lower left, there are some red maple saplings here, these little leaves you can see. The incursion of invasives, oxeye daisy, and crown vetch. Up here we see some pitch pines coming in. Here's a big rhododendron. So this is well overdue. The power company kind of gave up in this spot during COVID. I'll tell you in a little bit what we did about that to help them out. Here's a typical coniferous forest, pines in particular. This is Blue Ridge or the Appalachian Trail, slightly different habitat, a little cooler, and different soil conditions. So we have some different orchids in the mountainous areas of the Carolinas. And here we have a pine savanna. This is probably the green swamp down near Wilmington. It's a very specific type of habitat, and this location is a Nature Conservancy project, and it has a lot of native orchids. And it's a really popular or famous or well-known spot to search out native orchids and research native orchids. And this slide introduces Jim Fowler. Some of you on the call may know or may have known Jim. He was from Greenville, South Carolina, and without a question, the most prolific and finest native orchid photographer that has ever come along. Unfortunately, he passed about 1.5 years ago, but he gave us permission to use his slides in presentations such as this, and you will see about 6 of his orchid photos as we proceed. Other than those, all the pictures are mine. I take these photos in the wild, in the natural habitat, without the use of backdrops or lights or props of any kind. We don't touch the plants, and I promise you, no orchids were harmed in the making of this presentation. So field guides are often arranged by color or family or habitat type or bloom time. There's no right or wrong way, so I've chosen a convenient approach. It's simply the way I organize my hard drive, alphabetically by genus. And we'll start with genera that have more than 2 species in the Carolinas. So we start with Calopogon, the grass pink. And this is a fairly common species. Again, wet spots, pine savannas, stagnant bogs, wet roadside ditches. And here you've got 2 for the price of 1. We have an albiform. And this particular plant usually has 3 or 4 flowers. These are particularly robust specimens. And in this particular area, we get up to 10 or 12 flowers. There is an additional species, a couple additional species of Calopogon. This one is the pale grass pink. The other one was simply grass pink. This is pale grass pink. It grows in similar circumstances, blooms similar times. It's more southern. I don't think it gets too far north in North Carolina, but in South Carolina and Georgia and around the Gulf Coast, you can find this. There's another grass pink called multiflorous or multiflowered, but that's mostly Florida, and it does reach up into South Carolina. Somebody can correct me. I don't know that I've ever seen it in North Carolina. This is Cleistesiopsis. Until a few years ago, it was Cleistes. The taxonomist horsed around with it. It's called rosebud or spreading pogonia. It's a coastal plain plant. Grows in wet ditches, roadsides, in the savannas, wet savannas. Really quite attractive. When I photographed this one, there were some of the insectivorous plants, including Venus flytrap, which is highly endangered and endemic to North Carolina, as you know. This was the only species in this genus until some years ago. We found in the mountains or closer to the mountains, the Piedmont area, a very similar looking plant, but with a white lip. So this is a coastal plain variety. I'm sorry, a more western mountainous variety or species, beg your pardon. But we also now very recently have another species, Orchid, which grows in the coastal plain, the same as the pink one we just had, but it blooms about a month later. So that was apparently enough to qualify it as a separate species. It can't interbreed with the first one. I guess it's debatable, but at this point we have 3 Cleistesiopsis. Here's a very interesting genus. This is Corallariza, the coral roots. So named because their root system looks a little bit like branching coral. But this is very unique. These plants are mycoheterotrophic. That means they don't photosynthesize. And if you find these plants, you'll see they have no leaves, no chlorophyll, and they can't produce food. So what in the world is going on here? If you find these when they're first emerging from the leaf litter, and that's where they grow in woodlands that have open understory, they come up looking kind of like a mushroom. And when you look at them, the flowers are quite attractive, but they're only about 1/4 of an inch across. On the left, we have spotted coral root. On the right, autumn coral root. And in the middle, Wister's coral root, named after some guy called Mr. Wister. The plants get their nourishment. They transfer carbon and nitrogen from the surrounding leaf litter through a mycorrhizal fungi relationship. And this whole subject of mycorrhizal fungi is under intense scrutiny, has been for years. It's ongoing. Folks at universities across the continent, around the world actually, and various botanic gardens, such places as the Atlanta Botanic Garden, Missouri Botanic Garden, Chicago, New York, Longwood Gardens, all kinds of laboratories that are into plant research are fooling around with the mycorrhizal fungi relationship. There are several other coral roots in North America, but these are the only three that that grow in our area here in the Carolinas. And the others are more northern, some going all the way up into the cold areas of Canada. There's one other coral root. It is in a different genus called Bledia, but I included it here. It's also microheterotrophic, no leaves, no chlorophyll. It grows from southern Florida up into the Gulf Coast along the Panhandle, South Carolina, some in North Carolina, and actually I've seen it up as far north as Virginia. It's much bigger. The flowers are about 1 inch across, and the spike is about 1 foot tall compared to 6 or 8 inches for the others. And you'll get, maybe 10 or 12 flowers on a spike. It's really quite spectacular looking. All right, the next genus is the lady slippers. We've already seen the pink lady slipper. We've seen the yellow lady slipper. And we have one more, and I'm going to go out here and say we have the showy lady slipper somewhere in North Carolina. I don't know where. I'm not convinced it's still around. It obviously has been seen because it's in the official flora of North Carolina, but it's a northern plant. It grows all the way up into southern Canada from Newfoundland across to Manitoba. It occurs in large colonies in wet spots, wooded bogs, and wet areas. Largest of our lady slippers stands about 3 feet tall, and the pouch is, well, not quite the size of a tennis ball, but almost. And here again, for those who are counting, we have 2 taxa with the standard form and the white form. Is it still available in North Carolina? If so, it would be in the mountains, in a bog, at a higher elevation with cooler temperatures, with global warming or climate change, whatever you want to call that. Things are moving north, and this may be one that we lose. A genus called Smalaxis, the adder's mouths. Several species further north that we don't have here. The one on the left is the green adder's mouth. These flowers are tiny, size of small insects, flies, roughly speaking. The one on the right is Florida adder's mouth, and it's abundant in Florida and up into South Carolina, and I guess parts of North Carolina. Another genus, this is Neodia, and it used to be called twayblade. I guess they're still called twayblades unofficially. That's because it has 2 opposite leaves that clasp the stem about 1 inch or 2 above the ground. They're only about the size of a quarter. So that gives you some indication of the size of these flowers. The one on the left is called heartleaf twayblade. The one on the right is called kidney leaf twayblade. The one in the middle is called southern twayblade. I guess they ran out of appropriate anatomical parts. The one on the right, it tends to be more northern. It's not in South Carolina, but it is at its lower limit in North Carolina. The flowers are so small, it's thought they look like mosquitoes because it attracts male mosquitoes. Well, I'm not sure they can see, but we do know that plant emits a pheromone that smells like a female mosquito. So during mating season, the mosquitoes that are out looking for a party are attracted to the pheromone, and they buzz around these little tiny flowers and in the process collect pollen, which they transfer to other plants and fertilize them. The one in the middle is kind of a special plant in my mind. And the reason for that is it is the first orchid to bloom in spring, our first native orchid. It's already blooming in Florida. It will be blooming in our area here in the Carolinas, probably in, 2 to 4 weeks. And it will bloom the end of April up where I live in Pennsylvania. So that's a good sign. If you go to your favorite orchid spot, and these grow in wet woods, wet places, the one in the middle kind of likes little boggy spots with some sphagnum. The one on the right grows often under rhododendron tangles along a creek. Very hard to photograph. You have to get down on your hands and knees. Well, you have to with all these, they're so small, but that's a tough one to photograph. So on to our largest genus in terms of number of species available in North America, Platanthera, or the fringed orchids we mentioned before. About 40 species and probably a dozen or so in the Carolinas. This one is called padleaf orchid. It's basically a cool grower, so you'll find this in the mountains up along the Blue Ridge. If you go on the Appalachian Trail and wander around the woods a little bit, you'll find it in rich deciduous understory with some open space, some sunlight. You won't see it if it's not in bloom because it has two big round flat leaves that lay flat on the ground. But if it's in bloom and if a ray of sunshine finds an opening in the canopy and happens to hit this plant, it lights it up like a neon sign. And it's the largest flower of our Platantheras. The flowers are a little over an inch across and translucent and just really quite spectacular. This is clearly a southern Platanthera. This is snowy orchid. This grows in Florida and along the Florida Panhandle over to Alabama, I guess Georgia, Alabama, maybe Mississippi. I'm not sure how far it goes. It may reach Texas because it's closely related to another one we'll see in a moment that does occur in Texas. It does occur in South Carolina and I suspect in southern North Carolina, and that's about the extent of its range north to south. And these slides give you a good indication of how we like to photograph some of these orchids. All these Platantheras bloom from the bottom up. So on the right, you'll see a few flowers just opened in prime condition. And as the days and weeks pass, it blooms upward till we get up to the top of the spike and the upper orchids bloom. But sometimes you'll see the upper orchids, the upper flowers in bloom and the bottom ones are all round and deteriorating. So on the left, we see a pretty good timing of this photo. Most of the flowers are open. The one on the bottom right is just starting, and the one above it just starting to fade. But we caught most of them, and that's the way we like to get our photos of Platantheras. This is called the monkey face orchid. I'm not sure who thought that looked like a monkey face, but I guess they had a reason. It's similar to the white fringed orchid, except it doesn't have the fringe. And look at the size of that spur. It's huge. It's huge. It's bigger than the flower itself. Whereas the white fringed orchid, the spur barely reaches below the lip. This spur is also called a nectary. And all these Platantheras have a spur behind the lip, which serves as a nectary. And there's an opening in the lip at the top of that, if you can see my pointer, at the top of that spur. So what happens here is a pollinator, moths and butterflies, will land on the lip, reach their proboscis down that opening and down into that tube, to the nectary, where they can sip up the nectary in the bottom of that tube. In the process, their eyes or their proboscis comes in contact with the pollinia that are in the front of the flower here at the top of the lip. And they fly away with those pollinia stuck to their anatomy and go on to another flower and thereby pollinated. We saw the white fringed orchid early on. I just wanted to show you a close-up. It's a spectacular plant. It's one of our most abundant orchids. It grows, as many of these Platantheras do, in the coastal plain areas, in the bogs and savannas. Francis Marion State Forest or National Forest, the Green Swamp, other places like that. Wet ditches, we saw the wet ditch early on where we had 600 of these. So this one's one you can spot pretty easily. We also saw this when we were talking about the the natural hybrids. This is the gold-crested orchid. I just wanted to give you a close-up. It's really quite an attractive plant. Lights up in the sun like a neon sign. And we've noticed that these tend to be larger in the south, smaller in the north. So this one is taken in Maryland. The northern limit of this plant is southern New Jersey and Maryland and Delaware, and then it goes on south, getting larger and larger as it goes. So if you find one in the green swamp, it will be twice as big as the one on the left, twice as many flowers, twice as tall. And again, you've seen this, but I just had to show you this picture. This is one of my favorites. It is just absolutely flamboyant, to say the least. When the sun hits that, it looks like you're advertising something on a billboard somewhere with a neon sign. And you can see on the left, you can see the opening. This is where the insect, the pollinator, inserts the proboscis, which reaches down into these spurs to get nectar. Here's one that's really a special plant. This is the yellow fringeless orchid. And again, I know it's not yellow, it's orange. This one is extremely rare, highly endangered, federally listed. At one time, it grew from southern New Jersey down the coast to Maryland, Delaware, the Eastern Shore, on down to the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, and across the Panhandle to Texas. Today, there is one place, one little bog in the New Jersey Pine Barrens where there are about 100 plants. That's it until you get to North Carolina. No more in Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, but we pick it up again in the coastal plain and those wet habitats and on down and around to Texas. Very few of these, very few locations, highly endangered. The bog in New Jersey had a big forest fire, so we don't yet know what the impact is. But the good news is this plant, among others, is under careful scrutiny by a number of institutions. And we were able to get seeds from these plants a couple of years ago, and Longwood Gardens now has successfully germinated them and has seedlings with which we can repopulate that bog if the fire extirpated this plant. And we can also add these to other suitable habitats down the coast. But look how tiny that is. It would take 24 flowers to cover that penny. Just a special plant for me. I spent years trying to find it, but when I did, I wrote about it. One of my photos was on the cover of Orchids magazine a few years back. You'll see that photo at the end, actually. It's got a praying mantis on it that my wife found. And first time the American Orchid Society put anything on the cover besides an orchid. All right, Spiranthes. This is really, I'm going to use the word controversial orchid genus. These as a group are called ladies' tresses. They look like a little girl's pigtails or braids, sort of. I guess that's a good description. But the taxonomists have been fooling around with this genus for decades. They're not done yet. Drives us nuts a little bit trying to identify these. There are probably, well, it depends who you listen to. If you listen to Matt Pace from the New York Botanic Garden, he'll tell you there are about 41 species. That's too many. There's a lot of hybridizing going on. I think there's probably something more like 30 species that are readily identifiable, and then a bunch of maybes and could be's and possible hybrids. On the left is the most common. That is the nodding ladies' tresses, Spiranthes cernua, and it can be found mostly in sandy soils, but really accessible roadsides, particularly if you have a mowing regimen that mows after these have bloomed and gone to seed and spread their seed, and it sustains a population. There's a place in North Carolina where they actually grow in the grass median strip between a 4-lane divided highway. Lots of them. Fascinating. And actually, it might be one of the other species, but in general, Spiranthes will do that. Not so the one in the middle. That is fragrant ladies' tresses. It's much bigger. Most of the ladies' tresses are 4 to 6, maybe 8 inches tall. This one is 3 feet tall, and it grows in standing water. So you can find this in roadside ditches in the coastal plain. On the right is slender ladies' tresses, Spiranthes lacera. Tiny, tiny little thing that's highly magnified, but look at the lip. It looks almost like ice crystals. It's just really quite spectacular. And just a couple more to get over with the ladies' tresses here. On the left is lacera. In the middle, lucida, shining ladies' tresses, and on the right, lace lip ladies' tresses. The one on the right is another really tall one, 3 feet tall. It grows in a foot of water. So that you'll find on the coastal plain in the wet spots. It grows further north as well. The shining ladies' tresses in the middle is probably not in South Carolina, but rarely or occasionally North Carolina and further north. It's a northern species. This is rattlesnake plantain or rattlesnake orchid. I believe you've all seen this on a walk in the woods. Mixed deciduous woodland, open understory, sometimes pine woods, even pine plantations where it's acidic. But this spike is only maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. But when it's not in flower, you'll still recognize it by the leaves. Spectacular foliage. And you've all seen it, if not in the woods, you've seen it in a terrarium. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was a craze among florists. They would go out and dig these up, take a brandy snifter, fill it with decaying vegetative matter, some rich humus and decaying leaves, cover it with moss, fern, maybe a wintergreen, and an orchid. Not a great idea, but that was a fad some years back. Here we have in the background, what we see in the background is a resurrection fern. This is a common plant that grows in the trees. It kind of dries up in the off season and all brown and you hardly notice it, but it grows on live oaks, water oaks, close to water, close to streams, branches overhanging streams that get humidity. And when the spring rains come and the resurrection ferns perks up, if you look closely in amongst the ferns, you can find what's called the green fly orchid. It has a unique life story here. We talked about all the epiphytes that grow in Florida. Well, this is an epiphyte. It grows in Florida. It also is the only epiphytic orchid that grows in North America, north of Florida. And it grows up through Georgia, South Carolina, and a little bit in southern North Carolina, and that's it. So it has a really distinct story that goes with it. And it's a really attractive orchid, no two ways about it. I've only seen it a couple times. All right, some onesies and twosies as far as the genus goes. This is Galearis. In this case, Galearis spectabilis, showy orchis. And we get another 2-for-1 here. We've got the conventional form on the left, the alba form on the right. This plant is of concern. It was very common in mixed deciduous woods on the in the Piedmont area and up lower altitudes in the mountains, from in New England states all the way down to the Carolinas. It's of concern because people have noticed that we don't see many seed pods. What has happened to pollination and pollinators for this plant? You can see on the extreme left, this brown spike thing, that's last year's seed pod. But in general, we are not seeing much pollination. So some scientists are sitting out in the woods or in botanic gardens for hours and hours, watching for pollinators to come along to try and figure out what all pollinates it and what kind of timing there is to the visits. The plant is the plant blooming cycle and the pollinator cycle out of sync due to climate change or some other reason? I mean, it's a mystery and it's a concern. We have to watch out for this plant and make sure we can figure out how we can enhance its chances of survival. This is Arethusa bulbosa, called dragon's mouth, a really spectacular plant of the coastal plain and pine savanna, not pine savannas, but bog habitat, mostly in the north. This will grow in huge colonies in Newfoundland, Ontario, Manitoba, and on south in sphagnum bogs, and it will hit North Carolina in some bogs in the mountains. And that's about it. I'm not sure this one occurs in South Carolina. One that does, quite abundant in sphagnum bogs, roadside ditches, and wet spots on the coastal plain, and mountain bogs as well. Sphagnum bogs up at higher altitudes, or elevations, I should say. Rose pogonia, you can tell this is growing in a wet spot. You see here the leaf of a pitcher plant. And on the left, you see these brown little pods. These are last year's seed pods. This is a colony that's doing very well right along a roadside. Another really unusual plant. This is called Triphora trianthophoros, three birds orchids, sometimes called spreading pogonia, although it's not really related to the previous plant. It's unusual in that bloom time is about 5 or 6 hours. Imagine that. When it's going to bloom, it will start to open up late morning. A flower will last in this kind of condition through mid to late afternoon, and then it fades, and that's the end of that flower. And you won't see another one until the next bud opens. It kind of blooms in cycles. And it's really a devil of a plant to find. You have to know a location where you're sure it occurs, and then you have to watch the weather. And people have come up with formulas. So many degrees drop in temperature over so many days during the bloom cycle, and that's when you go out and look. And if you miss it, you go the next day. And if you miss it, you wait till the next 2 or 3 days of temperature drop. And it's to tell you how tough it is. I've been chasing wild orchids for 50 years. Hard to believe. Of the 150 or so in North America, I've seen about 120 of them. This is the last one that I added to my life, so-called life list. The last time I saw a plant for the first time. That was just last July. So there's still hope. There's still time. Get out and start looking. Another plant that's highly endangered. This is a small world pogonia, and it is extremely tentative, highly endangered, federally listed, hard to find. It's only about 6 inches tall. This whirl of leaves is about 6 inches tall, and it grows on the forest floor in mixed deciduous woods where there are lots of ferns and other small herbaceous plants. So you could be looking right at it and not see it. It's thought to be extremely rare, and scientists are working to unlock some of the mysteries, but it is so hard to find. Folks have taken to actually hiring very highly trained scouts to go out and look for this. There's a project underway being conducted by the Smithsonian, mostly in West Virginia for the time being, although this plant occurs from New England south into the mountains of North Carolina. Don't believe it's in South Carolina, but I couldn't be totally sure of that. Somebody might be able to help me with that. But it's so hard to find. We've got these scouts, and I thought you might like to meet them. There's Fluffy Muffy, and I don't know if that's the real dogs that are finding these orchids. I just thought that was a cute picture on the internet. The point is, we have dogs trained to find drugs, explosives, the mangoes that you just thought you could bring home from Costa Rica, lost children, and now we have dogs that can find the small world pogonia. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other conservation work and how you might get involved. This happens to be Minnesota, and that's the showy orchid, showy lady slipper that we talked about, which is the state flower. Doesn't help us here in the Carolinas, but this is an example of a real interesting project. This road is famous for having large colonies of showy lady slippers in the ditches alongside the road. It's a tourist attraction. It's a real, what do we want to say, an inducement. The folks in the Minnesota tourism business take great advantage of this. People go to Minnesota and drive down this road just to see these plants. Well, there was a time, a couple of years back, where they had to do some road work because of stormwater management, and erosion, and so on. So they didn't do that work until a group of folks, local folks from some of the educational institutions, the native plant societies, garden clubs, came in. They cleared the woods behind this sign, put a little fenced in area, made a little clearing where they actually removed the plants from the ditch, put them in the woods, and let the road crews do their work. And a year and a half later, when they were completed and the road stabilized, they went and brought the plants out of the woods and put them back where they belong. So that was a group effort, and it was very successful. And this lady slipper continues to attract people who visit Minnesota. But it doesn't take a whole group of people. Here we have one guy. This is a friend of mine, Stuart, who I'm behind me is that ditch, 600 white fringed orchids. And here comes this guy on a tractor. Well, Stuart went up, chatted with the guy, and got him to cease and desist. At least we think he did. I don't know what he did after we left, but he took our message to heart. And here's a case of one guy going up and talking to somebody and trying to convince him to change his maintenance practices a little bit to the benefit of the orchids. So you all individually or as a group can actually have an impact. Here's another project. These folks are from Longwood Gardens up in Pennsylvania. They're in a sphagnum bog, and what are they doing? They are getting root samples and tissue samples for DNA analysis and mycorrhizal fungi study. So they tease back the sphagnum moss, expose the roots. You can see one leaf. This is a young plant that did not bloom. So we just have this year's leaf. In the circle, you see next year's bud or eye, and that will bloom probably next year. And we even have the one for the following year, the smaller one to the left. They collected a root sample and sent those to the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, where they have extracted the fungus. And those folks are actually establishing a fungal bank, much like we have seed banks to protect rare species and possibly use this to germinate seedlings in the laboratory. Doesn't hurt the plant. We cover the roots back up. The plant was fine. But that's something that I've been involved with both the Smithsonian and Longwood Gardens. And you can as well. And we'll talk more about how that happens. So this is that same bog. And it also is the same bog we saw earlier under the power lines where I said it was getting overgrown and the power company kind of dropped the ball. I think that was a result of COVID, actually. So we took matters into our own hands. We organized a work party on a Saturday, November of 2021. And lo and behold, we had a group of people come out Saturday morning to clear out 2.5 acres of overgrowth in that bog. We had 100 people show up, 100 people. They came from 6 states, including a couple from Oriental North Carolina that drove 500 miles one way to help. They were from the Smithsonian, from Longwood Gardens, from the Nature Conservancies, from various garden clubs, native plant societies, orchid societies, and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And here are some of the kids. We cut the stuff out of the bog, got a hold of it, took it to the truck where we hauled it away to quietly biodegrade out of the bog. And it worked, because here we are the following summer. There are some of the white fringed orchids that we uncovered and exposed, and they bloomed. And this is also part of the same experiment that's going on by the Smithsonian Center. Those folks are studying fringed orchids up and down the East Coast, from this bog in northern Pennsylvania to another bog in southern New Jersey, to a bog in Maryland, and on down the coast to the Green Swamp in North Carolina, and around the Horn to Georgia, and a bunch of sites in Tennessee. 45 sites in all, where they've collected tissue samples for DNA analysis, fungal isolation. And the second part of that is now talking about or studying the pollinators. And that's what the camera's for. So here's something I want to encourage you to get involved in. I couldn't do it because you can see how technically illiterate I am. And what we have to do is download data from these cameras. The Smithsonian put 6 cameras out in the field, and the batteries have to be changed every 3 days. So we employed, who are you going to call when you need a geek? You call the teenagers. So these Girl Scouts actually went out and took care of the cameras for the Smithsonian. And that's ongoing. And I will invite you all individually or as a group to help with this project, because this summer they want to put cameras out on the orange or yellow fringed orchids in the Green Swamp area. So if you're nearby or you like to drive down to the coast, let me know. I'll put you in touch with the Smithsonian, and they need help. This is an extensive study. They're going to add more species, and they're going to expand westward to Michigan and Minnesota. And they need folks like us. And I'm not a scientist, I'm just a hobbyist, but I was able to help, and you all can as well. So let me know, contact me. My email will be on our website, nativeorchidconference.org, or Amy can get you in touch with us. We'll hook you up with the Smithsonian, and you can help with their camera project. You need to go out every couple, 3 days, change batteries, make sure the camera didn't fall over. And if you know additional sites, they would certainly be interested. And this is another, you've seen this before. This is the bicolored orchid, but I just had to show you a couple more examples of the hybrids that we are protecting in that bog. Now, if anybody was counting, you're up to 43 different taxa, species, hybrids, forms, varieties. And I was going to show you a bunch more, and I don't think it's going to work because of the technical difficulty we'll have. So we'll try it, but we'll go through some slides. We added them because they're just some of our favorite. And I keep talking as we, plural. It's my wife, Amy, and I that do all this. Some of our favorite slides. You've seen many of the plants before, but you haven't seen a lot of them. And when we get done, you'll have about 57 of the 65 that we indicated. So let's see what happens here. Well, I neglected to tell you, this project is not just local, it's international. These are people that are helping. The lady on the left is from Australia. These are postdoctoral fellows at the Smithsonian. This is Zoe Smith from Australia, Edo Arangawadawa from Sri Lanka. In the middle is Ida Hartvig from Denmark. So this is a worldwide endeavor. I mentioned before that folks all over the world are studying orchid fungus and so on. So, and that's the lady in charge. That's Dr. Melissa McCormick, who I can put you in touch with. If you have access to Orchids magazine last July, she's got her first of a series of articles about all this work that she's doing. We'll just go through some of these photos. You have not seen this one before. We have seen the yellow lady slipper, a very small Platanthera. We've seen the grass pink, one of several species. Arethusa. And there, I guess that has to be considered a favorite. I've shown you that plant 4 or 5 times. That's the hybrid that it forms with the gold-crested orchid. This is a plant that is kind of unique. You can go out in the woods right now and find the leaf. and the leaf will wither and die, and then this flower spike comes up, and then when that withers and the leaves fall in the autumn, the leaf comes back up again. So it's pretty clever. It doesn't try to photosynthesize in the summer because it's too shady in the mixed woods where it grows. So it waits till wintertime. Crazy. This is the one of the species that the Smithsonian is going to expand in their project. And this grows in the Piedmont and even the mountain range. I think Mount somewhere up on the Skyline Drive. And we have a large purple fringed orchid as well. Mount Mitchell, I guess is what I'm thinking. There's a little jumping spider that found a home waiting for a meal. Here's that very rare plant that suffered a forest fire in New Jersey. This is a hybrid between the large purple fringed orchid and something called ragged fringed orchid, which is not something in our area here in the Carolinas. This plant's in West Virginia, but it creeps down into the northern part of North Carolina in the mountains. Another really rare and endangered plant, the purple fringeless orchid. We saw this one before, as we did this one. This is one you can count if you want it. If you don't, I won't hold it against you. This is a invasive alien, but most flora of most states include it as a native orchid. It grows almost anywhere, including cracks in the sidewalk and in parking lots. Cranefly orchid is another one that has no leaf during the summer and the bloom time. When the flower fades and dries up, the leaf will come out in the fall and photosynthesize over the winter, and then it fades before flowering. This is another very small Potanthera that you might find in the Piedmont and in the lower elevations in the mountainous areas, in wet spots, little ephemeral pools in mixed deciduous woods, and also in stagnant bogs. There's the large purple fringed orchid. This is a very small plant that likes it to be wet. It actually grows in marsh edges or pond edges. But if we have a place where there's a wet seep, for example, along the Skyline Drive where they've moved rock to make room for the roadway, and we've cut into a bit of a spring that flows for a good part of the growing season, this will grow right along the rock face, right along the roadway, where it has wet feet for the most of the growing season. We saw the adder's mouth before, as we did the white form of the pink lady slipper. This is called the frog orchid sometimes. I have no idea why. It doesn't look anything like a frog. I don't think it eats frogs, and I know frogs don't eat it. So that one's a mystery. There's the flamboyant yellow fringed orchid again, and the begonia. The large world begonia. We saw the small world begonia. That's the one that they have dogs looking for. This one is a lot more readily available, easier to find, and seems to be in pretty good condition in terms of its numbers and its longevity. This is another Potanthera we didn't see before, and it hybridizes with the two purple fringed orchids. And it grows, again, a lot of our orchids here in the Carolinas, the coastal plain, sandy, well-drained soil, but wet spots. So this one you can find also in some mixed woodland that's got lots of open spaces in the understory. And there we are. And I'll leave you with this, some places you can look for additional information. There's the little plant I told you was on the cover of Orchids magazine. My wife found that particular setting. More information can be had from the Native Orchid Conference. You can get my personal email address there as well. NAOC that's the folks at the Smithsonian. The Flora of North America is a written, I guess now it's available online too, but it's a little bit older, a project of the Missouri Botanic Garden and I believe Harvard, much more technical in terms of describing the species. Don't overlook iNaturalist. They will give you some help. And of course, your local native plant societies, both North Carolina and South Carolina. I think, I hope that you folks in those societies will put together some volunteers to work on native orchid observation and assist some of the ongoing efforts by local universities and the Smithsonian. And with that, I will entertain.
So our question is, during the winter time, we see the leaves that are kind of crinkly and stripy. And we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the common names for that and what it is.
Yes, we saw those. There are two. One, it's kind of stripy, sort of a almost the color of my shirt here, actually, a sort of a off green gray color with white stripes. And the other one is green on top with splotches and purple on the bottom. Those are the two plants, the tipularia or crane fly and the sometimes called Adam and Eve or putty root. Those are the two plants that we talked about that bloom in the summer with no leaf, and the flower stalk fades and the leaf comes out and photosynthesizes over the winter. So crane fly and putty root.
Can you specify which one is which for the audience?
Well, I knew you were gonna say that. I believe that the tipularia is the one with the green stripes.
Okay.
And the putty root is the one with the green on top and burgundy on the bottom.
We have a question about, a questioner thought all orchids were epiphytes, but since they aren't, what's the difference between a terrestrial orchid and a perennial?
Well, obviously we know that not all orchids are epiphytes. Many tropical orchids are epiphytes. They grow in trees. Our native orchids, for the most part, all except that one that grows with the resurrection fern, are terrestrials, so they behave just like any other perennial orchid. They have a life cycle that includes blooming in the spring. They die back, spread their seed, die back, and rebloom the following year, the same plant. So they act like many herbaceous plants, like a lot of the perennials that you grow in your garden. Other than that, they are distinctly different from most other plants. And that's the subject of a whole different set of talks or discussions. What makes an orchid an orchid? You know, why is this plant an orchid and not an artichoke or a lily? It's got to do with morphology. It's got to do with the seeds, which have no carbohydrate. They're tiny. It's got to do with this mycorrhizal fungi relationship. And they're distinctly different from all other plants. We say that orchids are the largest plant family in the world. The folks that like the asters and that group of plants, that maybe they are the Asteraceae, but we like to say it's the orchids.
Okay, we have a question in the Piedmont oak pine forest. What are the 2 or 3 most common orchids that we would find there?
I would think the pink lady slipper, possibly yellow lady slipper. The Galliaris spectabilis, the one that I said is having a problem with pollination, and we're not sure what happened to the pollinators. The rattlesnake orchid, that one with the real pretty foliage. Some of the, well, all of the coral roots, actually, all 3 coral roots. What else? Those would be the obvious ones that jump out at me.
And a couple more questions. Are there sources to buy native orchids that haven't been harvested from the wild?
That's a really good question. Typically, when I talk to folks about native orchids, that always comes up. Can we grow these at home? And my answer for decades has been no. And I say that emphatically because I don't want people to go out digging them up. You can't do it. It doesn't work. However, that being said, nowadays, there's a tremendous amount of research going on And people are improving techniques to raise orchids in a laboratory setting. It takes sterile conditions. It takes a great deal of science, chemistry, stuff that's way over my head. But it's happening. And so there are some plants that you may be able to grow at home. There are places you can buy seedlings. The best thing to do is to look for resources and then ask us. In other words, go to the website, nativeorchidconference.org, and in the contact us section, tell us what you found out, what you're trying to do, and we'll check it out for you. There are lots of not so reputable places or people trying to peddle native orchids. They're hard to grow. Yellow lady slipper is probably the one that you would have the most success with, not as a transplant, but a seedling that you purchase from a nursery. And we're going to get there. All this research with mycorrhizal fungi will enable us to repopulate areas that have been decimated or lost their native orchids for some reason, but ultimately also to allow us to grow them. There are people in our area here in the Carolinas, Jim Fowler was one, who had a bog garden in his yard. Very tough to maintain, but he was able to do it, and so are a few others. So it's something to talk about. Don't know if that's a definitive enough answer. I'm waffling on purpose.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're at the end of our question time period. I want to thank you so much for giving us a wonderful lecture on orchids. We were long overdue for that. We hope that we can involve you in future years.
Well, I'd be happy. It doesn't get any better than today here.
It's only
Often
going up.
orchids and football all in the same day. So appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again. Thank you everyone who tuned in from the comfort of your laptop or home computer. And we look forward to seeing you at the Native Plant Society meeting next month.